Hey, welcome back to the 53206 cast. I'm Alex.
And I'm Meg.
And this is a podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, a YouTube series. And if you're reading any of the blogs that were put out, I guess it's a blog series. A little bit of everything. We're just trying to give you guys an insight and an idea into what it is like to live in one of the poorest places in the state of Wisconsin, specifically the 53206 zip code, which is the poorest zip code in the state of Wisconsin. It's 99.2% non-white, and we are two white individuals who tend to stick out quite a bit in our particular zip code. So we're just here to give you guys kind of an insight into what it's like to live here and to talk about some of the issues, good, bad, and the ugly that happens with living in a place like the one that we live in. So, Meg.
Yes.
What would you like to talk about?
I wanted to talk about education.
Okay.
Particularly, Milwaukee Public Schools is going virtual.
Yep.
And I am, as a parent of two small kids.
I'm also a parent of two small kids.
I'm freaking out a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm freaking out for myself.
Okay.
I'm freaking out for my kids. And I'm also freaking out for our neighborhood. So
yeah, like the kids within the neighborhood.
Correct. Yeah. And just the education that everyone is going to receive. I'm quite nervous. And so I just wanted to ask you a few questions about that. So can I just get started?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, are there resources for parents who don't have, for instance, algebra knowledge or higher level math or reading skills?
That's a great question. So a specific resource that would be available to a parent that didn't have the requisite knowledge to help their child work through an algebra assignment.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm pausing because I'm scanning in my head how would a student, well, I mean, I think that probably the best course of action to take would just to be how you would try to find any knowledge or skill that you don't know how to do. So, like, for example, I was trying to recharge the air conditioning on your car, which I did, by the way. It's fixed. It's very cold. I went to Home Depot today. It's very cold. Ice cold.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, special thanks and shout out to Phil Fromm for helping or letting us use his equipment in order to make that happen. But while I was doing that, was stuck, and I was stuck because I knew that I was supposed to do one of the tasks in the list in order to go from no AC to AC, but I wasn't sure about how to actually complete the task. And so I had to look it up on the internet. I just looked up a YouTube video. So I know that it's not really necessarily very, I wish there was more of a clear-cut way of like describing like how you could actually access that information. But I would say you'd probably want to look at a YouTube video. One point or one tip would be to look at the title. Like if your kid has a textbook and they're supposed to be doing problems out of a textbook, look at the title of the section of the textbook and Google that, or Google a variation of that, and then look for videos. If you can find somebody that makes pretty high quality videos, that would be a good place to start. A lot of times what happens though with math content is that it ends up being way overly complicated, and it isn't very clear what exactly the video is intending to teach you. It'll teach you like the most simplest version, and then a middle, and then an extremely complicated version, but it won't spend probably enough time on the simpler, more like foundational steps so that you can then build off of those and add it to the larger steps. As far as reading content, not necessarily. You want to look at something called a Lexile score, but even that can be a little bit hard to navigate. Really, you just want your kid reading and doing math as much as possible, and that's going to keep them caught up within reason. There's going to be little nuanced pieces of information that they might miss, but the more that the kid is reading and the more that the kid is doing math, the better they're going to be in the long run.
Thank you. So this ties into a little bit that same question, but many people we know from our neighborhood are single parents with multiple kids. How can they make sure their kids are getting a good education while doing online learning?
I wish I would have heard these questions ahead of time so I could think about an answer. But, well, you want to use the resources that you have available. So if you've got an older student, there isn't anything wrong with having the older student help teach the younger student. Kids have been together in the same household now since March. So what is that, 6 months, give or take? It'll be by the start of the school year, maybe 5.5, 6 months. So they've been spending a lot more time together and probably have developed stronger relationships with one another than they've had previously. So because of that, those relationships are what help kids that are struggling learners learn better. Is typically like a relationship. And so you can definitely, or you should use that to your advantage. Like, May will teach Dex
Sure.
A math concept
Yeah.
or just a different way to approach a problem. And because the older learner that's now in the role of a teacher has learned that task or skill fairly recently, so maybe within the last 2 years, where I probably haven't learned how to do long division. I learned long division when I was like 10.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time since I've had to learn how to do that skill. But for somebody that learned it 2 years ago, it's still pretty new and pretty fresh. And they can actually remember the multiple ways that they were taught and then attempt to teach the sibling in those same ways. So I would say don't be afraid to use siblings to help out with that, especially when we're trying to occupy a lot of time, because an educator or a school really serves two functions. It educates a kid, but then it keeps them occupied throughout the day. And so you're going to want to try to build in some of those times where maybe the older student doesn't need to be doing coursework necessarily. They just need to be occupied with something positive and productive, which helping their sibling learn math or reading with them out loud. Those would be great ways to engage both of those students really by doing the same task. And again, the more math a kid does and the more a kid reads or is read to, the higher the outcomes in the other skill sets are going to be.
Good. You didn't totally touch on one of my questions, so I'm just going to ask it in a different way. So, for instance, May, our daughter, she is getting to the point where she wants to get A's. I know as her parent, I want her to know what she needs to do to get A's. So how can a parent know that their student is doing well, doing the right things, getting the right fundamental knowledge? I mean, I guess you would probably need to, I feel like it's something like you would need to trust the teacher.
Sure.
But
many students are going to have a brand new teacher for this school year starting up. Yeah.
So how can you just make sure that your kid is leveling up?
Sure, and I guess it probably would be smart, since not everybody that is going to listen to this at some point maybe will know that I'm an educator. I've been in education for 13 years. So I was a classroom teacher for 12 years and then a school leader for 1 year. And we've been having a lot of these same types of conversations with our leadership team at work, the larger district leadership team, about how to engage parents and how to make sure that they have clarity around what their child is supposed to be doing. So it's just one of the functions of a teacher is to help a kid work towards getting an A, because an A should represent the fact that they've learned and mastered all the content that they're supposed to be covering. So it'd be really important for a parent to be thinking about school in that way versus a list of assignments to be completed. The assignments sometimes will force a kid to learn the required material, but not always. And so you, as a parent, you're going to want to make sure that you've got a clear understanding of something that's called like a learning target, or we use these I can statements or Common Core standards. Really what they are is just a list of things that the kid is supposed to be able to either know or do at a high level. And a teacher should be able to give you those fairly easily and fairly quickly. So if you are teaching, like, say, Dex, who's in first grade or going into second grade, there you go, who's going into second grade, I know what skill sets a second grader should be able to have and possess. I understand that not everyone is going to know that because they're not in education. So really, ideally, your teacher would be communicating, your child teacher would be communicating the list of skills your kids should be able to do. And if they aren't or haven't, it would be totally fine to ask for that piece of information. What are we working on in class today? What is a version of the assessment going to be like, so that I can help my kid prepare for the assessment, whether it's a test or some type of deliverable item, something they have to make or build or construct or write, one of those types of things. So really what you're looking for is clarity from the teacher. And that is actually one of the biggest requests that I have heard, and one of the biggest requests that I've had out of parents in the past is, if you want to be engaged with your child's education, you have to know what it is that they're learning about. And you have to have a clear understanding about what specific skills they should have, You should have a clear understanding about where they're deficient in those skills. And then you should have a clear understanding of what other soft skills are going to help them be successful in the long run after they're done with school. So, for example, if your student has a very difficult time staying on task or staying focused, completing one task before moving on to the next one, well, that's a skill that, while we don't always have to have that, a skill when we're at work, it's actually pretty important a lot of times to be able to say, okay, I need to complete this one thing, cross it off my list, and then move to the next thing. And so, just general time management could be a skill that the teacher and the parent and the student want to work on together, because that's a skill that in the long run in your life is going to be beneficial to you in whatever career field you go in. So we do kind of talk about these deeper learning competencies a lot at work. And there are things like communication, collaboration, problem solving, and critical thinking. Having an academic mindset, which means that you think about yourself as a learner and you think about your thinking. Kind of like a metacognition type thing. So you have an understanding or a self-awareness of how you interpret the world and how you learn new things. And so a parent can very easily help develop that with a student. Then we talk about being self-directed as a learner. So if your child is engaging in the content being delivered at school, but is also really into building things with Legos, like you can help your kid become self-directed in their schoolwork by helping them become self-directed in their Lego building, and like pointing out, okay, when you wanted to build this dinosaur, you sat down and you got all the bricks that were the same color, and that was that was first step one. So you are directing yourself as you're kind of moving through the process of creating whatever it is that you're creating. And then there's also content mastery, which would just be understanding content. It's really important that parents understand that the content that the teacher is assigning to the student is sometimes subjective and just based on whatever the teacher wants the kid to be learning. And so learning is great in general. When we talk about creating lifelong learners in education, and all that means is that we just want kids to grow up into becoming adults that are consistently and constantly trying to learn new things, because the more that you learn about a specific topic, or the more that you just kind of engage with the learning process in general, the more fulfilling life you have, and the more educated you are, clearly, because you've learned more. And that just creates better, high-quality individuals, mostly because you get to then take those things that you've learned and find a career field that fits your unique needs and skill sets. So ideally, that's the long-term goal, right? Like to come out of high school with a good understanding of yourself and the ability to go out and make some money, in a career field. So out of those 5, it sounded like you said 5 different. Yeah, there's 6 of them. Yeah.
Okay, it sounded like only one of them was like learning algebra. Is that correct?
Yeah. Have we talked about this at all?
No, that's really interesting.
Oh yeah, no. Content mastery would be the only one. So yeah, it's communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and problem solving skills are 1. Academic mindset, self-directed learning, and then content mastery.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
So really, those other 5 are just the way that you get at the content mastery.
Yeah.
And so there's like this kind of, it's a little hard to explain on a podcast, but there is a triangle. It's called a deeper learning triangle, and I don't even remember who made it up. But mastery of content is one of the parts of the triangle. Growing in your identity is the second part.
Sorry, but isn't a triangle only 3?
Yeah, 3. So 3 parts.
Oh, there's 3 parts to this triangle.
Yeah, so it's content
6.
mastery.
Okay.
So it's like understanding content, or like mastery of content. Then it's the second one would be like growing in your identity as an individual, and then the third one would be creativity. So you express your identity through your creativity to show the mastery of the content that you have learned, and that is how you go deep in learning. So it's like the deeper learning kind of framework, or like whenever I talk about deeper learning, that's the same like kind of spiel I give to a student or a parent is. We want you to grow as an individual and express your own unique creativity of the content that you've mastered, and you have to inherit that has to be done in your own way. It can't be done systematically through a set of tests. It's going to be more. You're going to be more inclined to do some type of like project-based learning or problem-based learning, or a learning of a specific content area where you go super deep into it.
That's really helpful. I never knew any of that. Wow.
Well, there you go.
That's great.
Yeah.
So just kind of as a recap, I can go to my kid's teacher and say, like, what are the key, whatever you just phrase you used, what are the key...
The learning targets or content standards. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yep.
And then I can kind of, like, I could ask Dex, okay, well, what have you learned about this? Or what have
Right.
you learned about that? And how have you gotten there?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and I'd suggest if you knew different ways to do the same math problem, that you go ahead and do that. Like you, I'm sorry, let me just rephrase that for a second. So if you, yeah, I'm just
Because I don't know
have
different
no idea
ways
what
to
I'm
do math.
if your child was learning one specific way to do one specific sequence of steps to solve a math problem, and you know a different sequence of steps, it's totally fine to teach multiple ways of solving the same problem. So don't shy away from that. If you were taught one way and the teacher teaches it another way, well, right now we're virtual. And so it's going to be okay if you have to teach it your way. Don't get hung up on the idea that it has to be done one specific way.
Great.
Yeah, we haven't talked about inequities in
So
education.
my next question
Okay.
might get into that. Can you explain asynchronous versus synchronous schedules and the importance of that for a teacher, a student, and a parent?
Okay, so this is, I thought this is actually what we were going to start with, so I'm glad we're going to probably end with this here. Okay, so there's two terms that you just mentioned here, and we have to define. So we have synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is virtual school that takes place at the same time as the classroom would normally take place at. So if at 8:30 on a Monday morning your kid is learning how to do dividing fractions in the classroom, then at home at 8:30 that Monday morning your kid is hearing a lesson about dividing fractions. They're practicing dividing fractions. They're working together in a group to divide fractions. And then at some point later on, they're being assessed at dividing fractions. Okay, so I've worked at what used to be an alternative school. And it was alternative because the students that we would typically get were credit deficient. Credit deficient at a high school setting means that you failed a class, basically. The curious thing with credit deficient kids is they don't always, it doesn't mean that they've always like not learned the material. They just, for some reason, they didn't learn it at the right time, or they didn't learn it in the right specific way, or they didn't learn it fast enough for wherever the pace of the class was, or some set of life circumstances happened, and for whatever reason, because of that, like they didn't pass the test. So very rarely have I met a credit deficient kid that is less intelligent than a non-credit deficient kid, which I've always thought was kind of strange,
Yeah,
right?
that is
Because you would
interesting.
assume like, okay,
Yeah.
you're deficient in credits, which must mean you have a deficiency in skill sets,
Sure.
educational skill sets. But very rarely have I found that to be the case. So typically, it just means that the timing wasn't appropriate for the individual. Maybe they have a mental health issue where they have a really hard time sleeping, and so they sleep during the day. Ideally, once they get to the real world, you're probably not going to be able to do that. However, my job currently is somewhat asynchronous, and your job is always asynchronous as a web designer. I mean, even mine isn't, because I need to be in certain spaces at certain times. But if I have to get something done, I need to get it done. So, okay. So what we've found though is typically what would happen was a student that was credit deficient did, for the most part, about 90% of the time, meet one of these three markers. They were either a student of color, they were a student that was living in poverty, or they were a student with a severe mental health issue that made it difficult for them to complete school at the time that they were intended to have it completed. So when we talk about inequities in education, we talk about different outcomes for different groups or different subsets of the population. And so we could very easily make three different subsets of the population: students of color, students living in poverty, and students with mental health issues. So we have found that over time, because of the high number, or because of the high percentage of students that would be referred to us because of their credit deficiency being, again, students of color, students living in poverty, and students with mental health issues, that was actually creating a disparity or an inequity, because those students those students needed to be doing their work in an asynchronous fashion, not a synchronous fashion. They needed to be, their classrooms either needed to be smaller, or they needed to have flexible learning times where maybe one day they're there and one day they're not. Now, we don't typically operate that way, but we did for a long time offer a night program where school went until 7:30 at night. Some students took advantage of that, and some students didn't take advantage of it. The only issue with asynchronous versus synchronous time is it's efficient, or more efficient for a student to, or for the majority of students to operate in synchronous time, because it's very difficult to plan around the schedules of 8,000 students, or in Milwaukee Public Schools, it's like 50,000 kids, something like that. So very difficult to manage the schedules of that many kids when it could potentially be random. So that's why we have math starts at 9:02. So you go and you go to math at 9:02, and then you sit down and you 30 or 35 of your peers, and you will learn how to do math together, because that's the most efficient way to educate a student. It's probably not the best way, and it's certainly not the best way for all of them, but for the majority of students, that works. That works out just fine. So we've kind of come to the consensus that we've got about between 15 and 20% of the students in the school district that I work in that tend to operate on an asynchronous schedule. So they either struggle to be beholden to the typical schedule, or there's outside forces that are at play that just make it difficult for them to engage with school on a synchronous schedule. So, however, the problem with that is from a school setting, if you've got a class of 30 and 5 of the kids are kind of your asynchronous type kids, those are typically going to be the ones that, again, are going to fail the class, but they're also going to be the ones that aren't that don't get the same level of teacher support that they're going to need in order to be as successful as possible. A lot of times too, if for sure if you're living in poverty, and for sure if you've got a mental health issue that makes it difficult for you to attend school, parent support is going to be very different than the parent support offered for a student that asynchronous time works really well for. Especially as you get older, and if you're a student with a mental health issue, it can be very draining for a parent to try to figure out how to manage that. If you're a parent that lives in poverty, which I think is kind of where you're going, and that's really most likely kind of the angle that I think you and I are coming from when we think about this. So if you think about a parent that lives in poverty, what are they typically doing during the day?
Yeah, they're typically working their 12-hour, $12 an hour job, and then they're working, they got to get there, they're taking the bus, they're gone for 10 hours.
Yeah, I know that we're thinking about a couple of families in particular when we're talking about this.
And those families have multiple kids. I'm worried for them. Yeah.
So and I'm worried too, because while some students, students particularly coming from a place of poverty, many times the parent support is fantastic.
Yes.
But the parent support is it's going to be, I think you said it really well. It's one more thing.
It's one more thing that they can't, that they don't have the capacity.
Yeah,
Yeah, they don't have the capacity. Right now they are trying to pay their bills. They're trying to make it. And when you're living in poverty, from my understanding, your capacity is already at the top, and you don't have a capacity to take on one more thing. And now we're asking all these parents that are in poverty to take on one more thing.
Yeah, and the way that's going to manifest itself. So if you're I'm thinking about a couple of the kids in particular in the neighborhood that parents work, and they're going to figure it out, because you just always figure it out. But it probably is kind of what we talked about at the beginning. There's going to be a sibling helping out with the younger sibling. So you might have a sister that's going to help the other sister learn, stay on track. Well, but the older sister is supposed to be
is going
in class.
Yeah, exactly.
And so now the older sister is now
behind.
Asynchronous to keep her sister synchronous. And those types of situations are going to come up more often, because that what we talked about the delivery of content as being one of the purposes of school, but then the other one is just a general place where kids can go. And we've been hearing that a lot in the news, right? I've been hearing my friends talk about that. What am I going to do with my kid? I'm supposed to be working.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a challenge. So where there's going to be bigger inequities with for sure with students living in poverty, for sure with students that have mental health issues. Because in our neighborhood, because being a person of color and living in poverty almost go hand in hand in our neighborhood. I mean, I can see that also, being just another layer to, creating, further gaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, we talked about this. I don't know if you remember, we talked about it on one of the shows or one of the episodes, or we just talk about it at home at night, but 71% of African American students don't graduate high school in the state of Wisconsin. And
Wow.
there's a whole bunch of them that live in our zip code.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of them that are living in poverty. There's a whole bunch of them that have they're living with the effects of traumatic life experiences.
Yeah.
And they're now going to be tasked with learning outside of a space, outside of their traditional learning space. They're going to be potentially caring for younger brothers and sisters, who knows? And they're going to be, just trying to get by when getting by was already hard enough as it was. And so, I mean, our recommendation for, our school district, and the recommendation for, if you're a school district official that's listening to this, my recommendation would be, we got to figure out a way to make sure that those kids that are, of one of those three, are coming from one of those three, subsets of the population, or somebody that needs that asynchronous time. We got to be overcompensating for that, and understanding ahead of time it's going to be inefficient. It's going to be
so
one
you're
teacher
saying
reaching out.
As a teachers need to understand that it's going to be inefficient.
Sure.
And
so from a
need
higher
to
level
put in
systems
that
perspective,
work.
yep, that should be, those things should be accounted for. And from an individual classroom teacher perspective, that they got to be aware of that. That if you're a kid that's not in the Zoom call, that doesn't mean that you don't want to learn. It doesn't mean that education isn't important to you. It frankly doesn't mean anything other than your life circumstances make it difficult for you to be on a Zoom call at whatever time you're supposed to be on one.
Yeah.
And it's probably not the kid's fault.
Yeah.
And it's probably, and no kid, no person wants to reach a time point in their life, I don't know, 25 years old, and realize that they had a lousy education.
Yeah.
Or that they didn't live up to their potential at that point of their life. And nobody wants that. So we got to be really careful not to create further inequities. And we're talking about this in a way that is, at first was probably a little lighthearted, but it's not going to be surprising to me if the graduation rate goes down this year. And who is it not going to go down for? It's not going to go down for the synchronous learning kid that has a nice house with kick-ass internet and brand new Chromebooks, and they can sit there and they can do their work in a nice quiet space.
Yeah.
It's gonna, the asynchronous is gonna be, it's gonna be kids that have spotty internet. They're using a hotspot that probably works half the time. They're using a district issued Chromebook, which may or may not work. They're using, it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong either, by no means. Everyone is just doing the best they can with what we have. But that's where those inequities are going to show up, is for students whose life circumstances already make it difficult for them to engage with education. So, if a kid is taking care of a sibling and they're learning at the same time, we have to check ourselves and check the need to get angry with the kid or frustrated, and we have to figure out, we have to hear their disengagement as a cry for help, because nobody
and not judge them,
and no,
because I think I would tend to judge them and think, why don't your parents care? Why don't you care?
Right.
But that's a bias, and that's something to check ourselves.
Yeah. So if we're intentional about it, we can do some things to kind of curb that. And I'm not even really necessarily offering up any suggestions right now, other than, listen to the student population that is going to go asynchronous, and then develop some plans to help make sure that they still meet the same types of learning requirements and credentials that you would ask of any student that's synchronous. And then, some of those things that we talked about before, about making sure that there's clear parent, school to parent communication about what the kid is supposed to be learning. Make sure there's clear communication about the deficiencies. Probably going to have to over communicate in order to make sure that parents feel supported during this time too, because like you said at the very beginning, it's one more thing.
Yeah.
We've got you and I have a lot of really great things going for us right now, but one more thing is one more thing. Yeah. And it's going to be hard, and the rest of our life is pretty easy. Yeah. And so adding this is going to be a stressor.
Okay. So, last question.
Okay.
So how can people with more access, more time, more education support these kids that have less?
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, it really is when you talk about excess and access, I can never remember what we actually post online or what is just like us talking about it.
Yeah.
But there's a connection between access and excess. So you can use your excess. So if your excess is time. So if you're a stay-at-home mom and you have extra time and you know of a student in your son or daughter's class that is going to be receiving their education asynchronously, then you may want to consider reaching out to the family and seeing if there's anything that you can do to help.
Or even
support.
the teacher and say, hey,
Sure.
I'd love to be a reading buddy or something like that.
So yeah, and really it's like those two things.
A virtual reading buddy,
Yeah.
So it's
perfect.
safe.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's those two things. Like you want to help kids read and you want to help kids learn to do math. Because if they can do those two things, then the rest of that can kind of be built off of it. Social studies is just another way of doing English. And science is a combination of English and math, problem-solving skills. So if you can do English and you can do math problems, then you're pretty much good to go in the other content areas. So yeah, so finding out which students are kind of in that asynchronous space, and then look like you, as a parent. I mean, you probably know. I mean, I know some of the kids that struggled in May's class.
Yeah.
And talk to your children about making sure that their frame of reference for that student is done in a positive way.
Sure.
And I think it goes back to if a student is disengaged, or if you know of a student that's struggling, teach your children that disengagement from education is actually a cry for help, because nobody wants to be ignorant, nobody wants to be uneducated. Deep down, everybody knows that education is the pathway to education is the pathway to equity, but education is a pathway to an equitable society. Education is a pathway to a fulfilling life. And once we have equitable outcomes in fulfilled lives, like if it doesn't matter what color you are, as long as you have a fulfilled life, like that's what an equitable society would mean. So as long as we can get to that point, and if you want to help facilitate that and be a part of that, I wouldn't necessarily just look at and try to find like the students that are living in poverty, or obviously are students of color, or obviously have a mental health issue that makes it difficult for them to come to school. But I mean, I would probably at least be a little bit more aware of, hey, if there was somebody that you knew was struggling, like let's help alleviate some of that struggle. And specifically, try to use your excess time or financial resources to provide access for educational help for that particular kid. So if there's some type of, like, if you buy like Epic is one of the programs like that you could purchase for a kid, I think, in order like for them to read off of. So like you could buy that for your kid, and you could buy it for somebody else in the class that could benefit from it.
So me and your sister Ash were talking about this yesterday, and she had a really good solution. She said, why don't like the people from the suburbs like buddy up with a class from the inner city of Milwaukee? And I just thought that was such a cool idea.
Yeah, and that is an awesome idea, especially if it's an idea that is where all of the work is done not by the teacher.
Sure, by like a parent from,
right.
From the suburb. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great idea. Because you are immediately breaking down geographic barriers.
Yeah.
By going on Zoom. So yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, any of those like types of things where you're trying to help students have more of a more diverse interactions. I mean, that's fantastic too. So all right, I think we wanted to talk about two things real quick. Why don't you tell me about something, a sign of change? What's something that you've seen? So we're always looking for things that are new or different, or just kind of signs that the neighborhood is going from one way to the other. Yeah. And so what's a sign of change that you've seen recently?
A pretty small one, but I was excited to see that one of the neighbors down the street put up some new flowers and some little like light posts that are solar.
Oh, that's
what
cool.
are those called?
Sure, like a solar powered.
Yeah, just like little
light?
little lights that like go up to their doorway. It just looked really nice. I thought they did a good job on it.
Why is that a sign of change?
Because most people don't do anything to their front yard. They don't really they don't put any money into, I should say a lot of people on our block are renters,
Sure.
And typically renters don't tend to do any sort of improvements to their house.
Yeah, why would that be?
Because they move after a year. Yeah. What do you think?
Sure, yeah.
I feel like
the mobility rates are really high here. Yeah.
I need to have the right answer, and maybe are you asking because you know the right answer?
No, I don't. I'm just curious.
So why don't people put work into their house if they're renters? I mean, from what we've seen, a lot of the people on our block move after a year or after after whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
So they move around a lot, and I think also it's just not high on their priority list. I mean, just kind of going off of if a lot
that
of
would
people,
be an extra. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have that extra money just to buy, flowers for their house or something like that.
They don't have excess because
Yeah.
in a lot of ways they weren't given access to a educational pathway that resulted in a marketable skill. Yeah, I wrote this whole big thing about that.
It's good.
I just got to post it. Yeah. I'll get there.
That's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was very excited to see that somebody just cared a little bit about their front yard, and it just looked really good.
Nice.
It was nice. Yeah.
Cool. I have a sign of change,
Yeah, let's hear it.
and then we'll wrap things up here, I think.
Sure.
Okay. Sign of change. Yesterday we had my brother up from Chicago. Hey, Jack. We had my brother from Chicago and Katie and Clementine. Hi. We had them up to visit. The girls went kayaking, and Jack and I just hung out. And then my sister, who lives just down the street from us, and her husband and their kids came over. And so we were all just hanging out. It's probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock by that point. And we're grilling out back, and it's starting to get late and getting dark. And during the day, I noticed that one of the neighbors, 2 houses down, had some tables and chairs set up, and they kind of had some nice kind of like
Twinkly lights.
Yeah, like a Christmas light kind of thing set up. Really looked nice.
It looked very nice.
Yeah. It was. These they're neighbors that are new to us. The family that lived there moved, and still owns it and rents it to our new neighbors. Talked to them a little bit, probably just like anybody else would if you've got a new neighbor. But the new thing, or the sign of the change, was this. In the past, I'm not exaggerating this, I hope, but like in the past, like if somebody was going to have a party on our block or up the block or on any street nearby, it was
so loud. There was one over on 9th Street. I don't know if you remember that, but it was so loud. We could our walls were moving, and this was like a block and a half away. It was so loud. So loud.
So during the day when they're setting up, I'm thinking to myself, like, this looks really nice.
Yeah, this looks classy.
I'm
could
worried,
this be different?
I'm worried that this is the same old, where it's like I'm gonna hear it. I'm gonna hear their music in my house as I'm going to sleep.
I'm gonna be
like
very
10:30
annoyed.
at night.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna be annoyed the whole time.
Yeah.
And it's gonna get out of hand, and because that literally happened.
Yeah.
Like. Maybe not every time.
Yeah.
Out of 10 times, how many times would that have happened?
It happened a lot. Yeah.
Like,
8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's highly likely that it was going to get it was just, it's a party. Like I get it. Like people are having a get time. Like, it's getting late. Like, get a little rowdy. Like things get turned up, whatever that means. Whatever. Anyways, so
what happened?
It was calm.
It was quiet.
Well, let me rephrase that. Let me rephrase that. Typically in this area, and I got like this whole like economic theory about like how this works, but like typically you're just not considerate of the people that you live around. Typically here, there is less consideration for your neighbors by new renters or by people that don't have a strong connection to the neighborhood.
Sure.
There's typically there isn't a ton of respect for the other people that live there.
Yeah.
It's a very much an individual centric mindset where I'm going to do what I want to do and I'm not going to care about how it impacts anybody else. Mm-hmm. And I felt very confident that wasn't going on really at any point during the party.
Yeah.
I think they probably had 20 people in the backyard.
Yeah.
And the music got a little loud, but it did not get any louder than what I would find to be tolerable.
Yeah.
And even at one point, somebody went and turned it down a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that's a sign of change for me.
Yeah.
Because they're new to the neighborhood. And when you're new to the neighborhood, that means that you're like kind of getting a feel for what you can and what you can't do.
Sure.
And I think that our little half of a block has established itself as we're respectful to each other.
Yeah. We think about each other.
We think about each other.
We don't get too crazy.
We help each other.
Yeah.
If you need something, you come and ask. Come and ask, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we think about our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it's a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And not a bunch of rundown houses.
Yeah.
Where it's not a dump.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that to me was a sign of change. So yeah, two good signs of change.
Yeah.
We're on the upswing.
Yep. It's great.
All right. Well, I think that's probably about it. I think we're gonna go kayaking.
Okay. It's pretty windy.
Yeah, I know. Is that gonna be okay?
I don't know.
Well, we might go kayaking. We'll see. All right. So this has been another episode of the 53206 cast. If you're watching on YouTube, I don't know how to change. Well, I do know how to change the YouTube channel name, but I can't get it to actually accept any name changes. So it's still 53TWO06.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
We do have the hat that Alex is wearing now on our website.
Oh, yeah. So speaking of the website, 53206.org, check it out. Posted a bunch of content today and posted some content to go up there periodically, like scheduled it.
Scheduled it.
Yep. And as soon as we get the go-ahead from Travis, we'll be able to sell, or he is going to be able to sell.
He's selling it.
We are just the place where it's posted, and he's going to handle it all. All the money goes to him. Sell the hats. So he's got some other stuff in the works. If you are a resident of 53206, or if you have had your life altered in some way by 53206, either through coming here by us, by hanging out with us, or you grew up here, or you lived here for a portion of your life, or again, you've got family and friends in the area, we'd love to support any of your small business endeavors by posting your products available for sale on the website 53206.org. We know that in this area in particular, there's a ton of entrepreneurial mindset and a ton of entrepreneurial spirit, and we want to try to help get that out of people and out into the world. So
boost it a little bit.
What did you say?
Boost it a little bit.
Yeah, boost it a little bit. So we've got that. So we've got the YouTube channel. We got the podcast. Subscribe on iTunes. Guys out there listening, so far in the month of August, 23 downloads. Woo woo! That's awesome.
It may have all been from our daughter, but you know what? That's
okay. Our daughter has made several iTunes accounts and is just downloading our podcast. All right. Well, I think that's all. You got anything else you want to say?
I don't. This has been nice.
All right. Well, yeah. So hopefully you guys found some of that information useful, and you found those signs of change positive and productive. So until next time.
Bye.
Bye.